Hello everyone, welcome to Comicpalooza Presents. I am Craig Price from the podcast Matinee Heroes, and today we're going to discuss time travel. Or have we already? Maybe we're going to, maybe we have to, who knows? Maybe both, but more specifically, we're going to discuss Avengers versus Doctor Who did time travel right? Welcome, Ira. Tell me a little bit about yourself and your love of time travel.
Well, I wish I had time to tell you everything, but I don't. Basically, I started watching it as a youngster in the 80s. It took me a little bit. However, I managed to go to the 20th Doctor Who anniversary in Chicago. Since that point, my brain has just been storing Doctor Who knowledge like a sponge. Sometimes I'm blessed enough to be able to actually convey that knowledge to people who are willing to listen to me talk about it.
Well, we're talking time travel, and off the bat, I am not a physicist. I think time travel is a great little logic puzzle, especially with all the paradoxes that pop up. But if you could help me understand the difference between Avengers time travel and Doctor Who time travel, because from what I understand, Avengers Endgame dealt with parallel universes in that anything we do, multiple of the multiverse happens, there's millions of different options. But with Doctor Who, it seems like it's all one stream with fixed points that cannot be changed, and everything else is just depending on the whims of the writer.
I think there's a lot to be said for that. I think that one of the things that actually was brought to my attention recently is that in Avengers, you have a very limited time span in which to convey the concept of time travel. So you have to basically choose one concept, run with it, and have that be the concept you're doing, which, as you mentioned, is a parallel universes. You can go back, you can take gems from one universe, maybe bring it over to a new universe. Hopefully things happen, you can make things done. In Doctor Who, you get the ability to sort of rewrite the history of Doctor Who as the history is being made. I'll tell you that there's at least 5 or 6 times that Atlantis has actually sunk for various reasons in Doctor Who. Any given year, it could be a different reason.
In Avengers Endgame, it seems like they have definitive rules, but in Doctor Who, they have Time Lords that enact laws that need to be followed or don't necessarily need to be followed, or sometimes they're purposely rigid and other times they're totally flexible. So how do we adjust those two concepts to see how time travel supposedly should work?
Well, it is actually very tricky because in the Avengers, there's a lot of, again, you stick with a fixed system for actually doing time travel, you're actually stuck within the rules. And hopefully you can obey those rules within that construct. Hopefully there's a suspension of disbelief to the point where the audience and everyone else watches it and says, I get it, this works for me. With Doctor Who, basically, when they get a great idea or they want to rewrite something they think should have been done better by a different producer, they pretty much have the liberty to say, oh, the Time Lords lied to me. Or this was actually not a fixed point in time. This was actually something that was flexible, and the Doctor can go back and fix it whenever the Doctor wants.
Well, let's talk about fixing time. We'll start off with Steve Rogers, because Steve Rogers had a situation where he was able to, because the way the Endgame needed to be is if you took a stone, you had to go right back to where you took it when you were done using it, so that way you didn't destroy the parallel universe that was created. So he had a chance of, at the end, here's all the time stones, spoiler alert, here's all the time stones. I have to give you a spoiler alert for the most watched movie in the history of movies. But he goes back and puts those stones in their places, but then he stays where he is and lives out his life with Peggy Carter. Why didn't he tell anybody about things that are happening? Like, I don't know, there's going to be an attack on New York City. Ultron's going to happen. Thanos is coming. So ethically, can you explain why he should or shouldn't have said anything?
Well, I can say it was a very difficult part with me in watching the movie, which is the old classic, Captain America is supposed to help everyone, try and save as many lives as he possibly can. All it would take would be a simple phone call, and you could have stopped almost everything from happening. And the question is, why didn't he do it? In terms of how the Avengers actually dealt with it, it is very problematic. It is problematic in terms of why didn't he tell his own friends? Why did he wait so long? Why is it that he's appearing at the very end of the movie? He's older, and only then they should be saying to themselves, wait a minute, we could have saved Black Widow, we could have saved tons of people, thousands of people, millions of people, by preventing this in the very first instance. And that's actually one of the problems that comes into Doctor Who as well, which is if you knew the problem was going to happen, if you knew that there was something that was going to be preventable, why didn't you go back and fix it? Skyfall, which is a recent episode of Doctor Who, actually sort of has that same problem. At the very end of the episode, the Doctor forgets that the Doctor needs to go back and put the instructions on the plane, spoiler alert, to actually tell everyone how to actually get out of the plane while it's crashing. Well, if that's the case, why didn't the Doctor just go back before everything and even prevent them from getting on the plane? There's a whole bunch of issues that come up when you have time travel. And one of them is, if you truly are a superhero, why aren't you being a hero? Why are you just ignoring what's happening and letting things take its course?
Well, again, what moral authority does he have to even do that? Because let's remember, every time you make a decision, there's consequences. So yes, he goes back to 1944, 1945, whenever that was, and say 1968, he interferes with Hank Pym, who's going to do his Pym particles. By doing something, doesn't that create ripple effects?
Yeah, and that's the same problem you always get with any type of time travel thing or time travel concept is, what if the Doctor goes back and makes one change? What if Steve Rogers makes a change? And who's to say Steve Rogers shouldn't have made a change? That's the other question, too. One question that came up in the Avengers is when basically Iron Man says, you need to basically make sure my child actually is protected. Well, wow, there's only 7 billion people on the planet, but I guess it's more important to actually take care of just his child. So there comes a concept in terms of, are the heroes being selfish in terms of meeting their own needs at the sense of sacrificing other people? And by the way, the Avengers had no problem going back in time and doing anything they wanted, even if it could have potentially had a ripple effect in that. That's actually a really key issue. They're messing with a lot of stuff, and part of the problem is that it's sort of a simple writer's trick that if all of a sudden you're boxed into a corner, well, now we got time travel. Go back and fix the problem that I wrote for this particular thing, such as a movie or a Doctor Who serial, and I can fix the problem immediately by just going back and saying, okay, fix it up, here we go, we get the do-over button.
Isn't it more like a Hail Mary pass at this situation where they've literally lost half of everything in existence? So to go back and get that is a big deal versus going back and maybe altering Earth because the attack on New York City, and that attack not ever happening or being stopped leads to something else that throughout the universe. So one is more of a Hail Mary versus another one is just on a whim.
Before, I think it's right around the same time Endgame came out, it was basically a series, Cosmic Ghost Rider, which involved the Avengers, and the concept was going back in time and killing Thanos as a baby, therefore preventing everything that ever went bad with Thanos doing. No longer was half the universe going to be destroyed, no longer was anything going to be destroyed. And they didn't do it, and again, is for the simple more questions, do you have the authority, as you presented before, do you have the authority to actually go back and essentially play Messiah or deity and actually determine as to what you feel a potential outcome for a future is, or do you just let things play their normal course? So I think you're absolutely right. And I do think it was more of a Hail Mary. I think theatrically it looked pretty good, but I still think there were plenty of Thanos stories out there that could have chosen to actually have a sort of a more consistent and less Hail Mary feeling for the movie, but they chose what they chose.
It seemed a little odd that Stephen Strange, when he had the Time Stone, and he's doing the twitching, and if I go fast enough, actually this camera will do it for me, it's pretty good. But he was able to see the all 4 million different variations of the future and find the one. How come Thanos didn't do the same thing about the Avengers after he was going to get rid of the stones? Because you'd think he'd have access to all that information too.
I'd love to answer that question. I can't think for Thanos. I wish that he would have. And it would have made sense to actually do that. One thing that isn't really brought up in the movie, which actually is more in the comics, is Thanos really is a character that always basically plans his own demise. He always puts literally a kernel of something that a hero can actually find a way to defeat him. That's almost been historically how Thanos operates. So maybe in this movie, what Thanos was doing is laying the groundwork for his own basically destruction. And I think that's entirely a possibility.
And Doctor Who has its own set of rules, some arbitrary, some not. But one thing that I do know that's different than most things is they talk about fixed points in time. Can you explain that and why there are fixed points, and how does the Doctor even know when a fixed point exists?
Well, how the Doctor knows a fixed point exists is kind of a mystery in itself, but the concept is that essentially there are fixed points in time that you cannot deviate from. Things that have to happen no matter what universe you're in, no matter how things are going to go, no matter anything you do, going back in time, observing time, messing with time as Doctor and companions do. Fixed points in time are things that cannot be deviated from. They have to actually happen.
Now, have they decided what makes a fixed point of time, or is that really at the discretion of the story?
I think that the fixed points in time are sort of as Doctor Who, loosey-goosey, and I think that they're wibbly-wobbly too. In terms of, for different stories, it appears that there are fixed points in time in terms of how things actually occur, which is a creation of the Daleks, but yet in other stories, those are a little bit more fluid, depending on what's happened during the season or depending on how the Doctor's adventures have progressed.
Now, in Endgame, they said that it's not like Back to the Future, where if you were to go back and kill yourself, you would snap out of existence, which would not happen it would just cause a parallel universe. But in Doctor Who, he has warned, and she has warned several times that doing that would make someone disappear. So can you explain how one would disappear and maybe another one wouldn't?
I would love to be able to do that. It'd be great to actually say that certain things will prevent people from existing or events from existing. But it seems to be that, again, as the universe flows on in Doctor Who, there's a lot of fluidity to what is happening and what's occurring. Whether or not Davros is destroyed, whether or not the Daleks are mutated, whether or not the Daleks become good, like they do actually in some of the... Basically, there's a lot of variety and a lot of variance in Doctor Who, which actually makes the series really great because you don't know what's going to happen next week. You don't know if the Doctor is going to solve a different riddle in time. The Doctor is going to actually influence a civilization. The Doctor is going to destroy a civilization. You just have to wait and see where the adventure progresses.
Now, is there a specific episode or two that you think Doctor Who does time travel better than others? Because Endgame, we just have the movie. That's it. 3 hours and 700 minutes later, that's all we have. But with Doctor Who, we've got 50 years. Which episodes do you find the most fascinating and the most representative?
I think that one that everyone should look at is Genesis of the Daleks. It came out in roughly around 74 time frame, and it basically talks about the creation of the Daleks. There's not a whole lot of deviance that you can do. The Daleks have to be created. Almost every season has the Daleks. The Daleks are the Doctor's key enemy in almost everything. So I think that episode actually really exemplifies time travel. Doctor, and spoiler alert from 1974, the Doctor is asked by the Time Lords to go back and destroy the Daleks before they're actually created. But the Doctor doesn't do it. So in other words, if the Doctor had done that, there really wouldn't be any Doctor. There might be some other enemies, but they'd be very minor.
Now, why was he so reluctant to do that? Is there something specific in the history of the Daleks that launches Doctor Who, or is it just because of a moral thing?
Actually, that's fascinating to bring that up because they do bring up the concept that other races will band together to fight the Daleks. That part of the Daleks' creation actually is the way the universe actually is formulated and the way the universe actually progresses in terms of, as they say, different species, different aliens, different people, different entities actually combine together forces that they normally wouldn't have done to actually fight the Daleks as a common enemy. So that's one of the reasons why the Doctor actually doesn't do it. It would be such an incredible deviation in the way the universe operates. It would be very difficult for the Doctor to actually justify morally, ethically, or in any way actually committing genocide on the Daleks.
So is there an episode where you thought that they may have made a kind of a mistake that you'd like to see them do differently, despite the fact the story was probably really good? It's just that they didn't represent Doctor Who rules as much, because I feel like the Time Lords are arbitrary in their laws and their rules.
Well, there are several stories. There are a couple of Capaldi stories. Specifically, there's one in which the moon actually hatches and then forms into another egg to actually be the same size as the moon, which is a little bit difficult to actually reconcile with, first of all, laws of physics, Second of all, the concept of Doctor Who, that the moon really isn't a giant egg. It just seemed a little bit strange that actually in that way that one progressed. The one that I like to call, for lack of a better term, the I Crust Monsters episode, which is another Capaldi one.
Yeah.
Where basically people were being killed by the fact they couldn't sleep and they need to sleep and form eye crust, which is very, very strange. So there's a variety of them. And frankly, nobody likes, except for me, actually, my family, we kind of like gunslingers back in Hartnell's day that involved literally just OK Corral and variations on that. So I'm asking, what was the point?
Because we wanted to see Doctor Who in the Wild West. That's the whole point of all of this. That's the great thing about Doctor Who. He can go anywhere in space and time. So that leads me to this question. And this is a question that you wanted me to ask you, because it seems odd. I think I know the answer, but apparently it's not as simple and cut as dried. Is Doctor Who part of the Marvel Universe? And I would say no, I haven't seen him, but apparently I may be wrong.
Actually, it's kind of interesting you pointed out. In the movies, there's no reference to Doctor Who, but if you read the comics, the Marvel comics, apart from the fact that Marvel had rights to Doctor Who for a number of years and produced a series of, Doctor Who does actually appear in some of the mainstream comics with the Marvel superheroes. So it is kind of interesting to think about, is the Doctor actually a member of the Marvel Universe? And if so, maybe we should see Doctor actually in Avengers Endgame, going back in time. That would have been kind of interesting. So,
we could just throw the TARDIS as it flies through space in the background.
Exactly. There's the end battle, and the TARDIS appears, and a couple companions come out, and some Cybermen, and there you go.
We've got this down. I'm going to call Kevin Feige and see if we can do this, retcon this right now.
I think we can go back in time and make a couple edits to Endgame, and there we go, because we can do that.
So Endgame is not a fixed point.
Endgame is not a fixed point.
It's always in motion. Ira, it's been a pleasure. We genuinely appreciate you coming on Comicpalooza Presents. If people want to learn more about you and your work, how can they connect with you?
You can connect with me on my email, which is domnitzira@hotmail.com. I'd like to thank everyone for having me on.
Well, don't forget to hit the like button, leave a comment below, and let us know what you enjoyed most about this episode. Listener feedback is important to us, and we want to know what you think. If you want to watch videos like this on more topics related to pop culture, click on the subscribe button and also ring the bell icon to get instant notifications. I'm Craig Price. Thanks for watching Comicpalooza Presents. Stay tuned.